Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now then, very happy to say, Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent is here in studio. Great to have you in. Thanks for popping in.
Cheers, Joe. Thanks for having me.
And we have former Scottish international Andy Nicol on the line. Andy, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. How are we doing?
Yeah, very well. So we'll come on to Ireland in a moment. Let's talk Scotland. Let's talk Scotland 2022 Six Nations. It all started so well.
It did. And that's 2 years running. It started so well against the same opposition, beating England 2 years running in the first game. And we all know that the Six Nations is all about momentum, and you get that first win, it should set you up. And both years we've failed to back up that win against England by beating Wales the following week. And this year was very disappointing, I have to say. It was, this team had been improving sort of steadily for the last couple of years. And that really, for me, was a big statement to go down to Wales and go down to Cardiff. We went down to Clonecley 2 years ago in behind closed doors and won. But Scotland haven't won down in Wales since 2002. And this was a big one. And they just weren't up for it. And that was, for me, what was really disappointing. Because if you actually look at the rest of the Six Nations, Scotland are pretty much where we thought we would be. Probably lose to France at home, beat Italy away. By beating England the first game, go down to Wales, then suddenly we'd be going to Dublin with a chance. And so that Cardiff game it hurt. That really stung.
And when you use the phrase there, they weren't up for it, that suggests a problem of attitude.
There's definitely a mental fragility, and I think Scotland have proven over the last 2 years that they can get up for one-off games, and they can win against some of the best. They've beaten France, the 2 years previous to the game just a couple of weeks ago, and they've beaten England twice, and beaten Wales, beaten Australia. So they can do the one-off games. What they've not had is consistency. And if you're going to make any inroads into a competition, especially the Six Nations, you need consistency. If you want to get to the knockout stages of the World Cup, you need consistency, and they've not shown that. And so, we have regressed. Scotland have regressed, and I don't think they've regressed physically. Yeah, you could start analysing some of the performances, but I just think mentally they just weren't up to going down to Cardiff as favourites and win. And that's a mentality that has to change, and it's hard to change that, because if you've not got the experience of doing it, it's hard to go back there when you need it.
What would the Scottish public say about this team?
Well, they disappointed. I think we can. I think we genuinely thought going into the Six Nations. So the last two Six Nations before this, Scotland had played 10 games, won 6, lost 4. The 4 games had been within one score. So that's how close they'd been. And so win that first game, you think you're really sort of making a step forward, but it has regressed, and that's disappointing. And a lot of those victories, those 6 wins in the last 2 years, a lot of it was based on the defence. And Steve Tandy's made a huge difference there. Scotland had the best defence in the last 2 Six Nations. And so, Scotland have always had reasonable attack, but and that got stronger as well with, not just Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg, the 10-15, Duane van der Merwe, Chris Harris went on the lines in the summer, Alec Price went on the lines in the summer, was a test line, and Darcy Graham. There's some real talent in that backline. So a solid defence and some good flair players, that's the combination that you want. But if you don't have the mental capacity to cope with that, then it just doesn't work. So I think there's been huge disappointment. We conceded 6 tries at home to France, conceded 3 tries away to Italy, which is 2 more than they've scored in the whole tournament so far. So that's not a good trend. And so there's genuine disappointment up here.
Yeah, the defensive disimprovement is very evident. So as you said, Steve Tandy came in post 2019 World Cup. They conceded just 5 tries across that 2020 Six Nations, whereas they're up to 11 tries with the game in Dublin to come. And even the penalty count, they're top of the class in terms of giving away penalties. I think 46 conceded, 13 against England, 12 against France. So all of these issues are adding up. Cian, I went to Andy very much to set the scene on Scotland before we had the cheek to trash them, but what have you made of Scotland?
deja vu, I suppose, really. I mean, it must be so frustrating to be a Scottish fan. I mean, you think back to even post Lions, like how well kind of Finn Russell did on that tour. Steve Tandy came in for a lot of plaudits, like Andy says, and you're kind of thinking, okay, this could be the time when they kick on. But I think Finn Russell has been poor throughout the Six Nations, and when one of your key men isn't playing, what chance do you have? So I think they have regressed. I don't think there's any doubt about it. You think back to a couple of years ago, I presume Gregor Townsend, wish he never said it, but he said that, you know, we wanted to be the fastest team, play the fastest rugby in the world, and that's probably backfired spectacularly. I think there's been a couple of positives. I think someone like Rory Darge coming into the Six Nations at back row has been absolutely outstanding, and it's probably just about trying to get the right balance, I think, in that back row with the likes of Hamish Watson. They're probably still struggling for a number 8 to give them a bit of go forward ball. So disappointing, but like you look at the quality that they have, and Andy listed them off there, like Darcy Graham, Stuart Hogg, Finn Russell could turn it on, and that would be, I'd say, one of the main messages that Ireland will be driving this week, that this Scotland team still are, it's a bit of a cliche, but they could, you know, we've seen it was 2010, like a Scotland team came and kind of upset Ireland, so it's not beyond the realms of possibility. So I wouldn't imagine Ireland would be taken for granted at all.
No, because they still have loads of talent. And Russell's an interesting case, because in some respects that Lions tour was almost a vindication of Finn Russell and the way he likes to play the game. But Andy, for instance, I don't know, was this picked up in the Scottish media, but certainly here, for instance, on Irish TV, Shane Horgan for the Willemse try. Shone one of those Piero style, Piero being the software, lights down on Finn Russell and his chase after the ball, and then his quote-unquote chase back. And it just showed a player in the first 5-6 minutes of a game, by the way, this wasn't tiredness, basically not trying. You know, in the way that Rory Darge is trying, he was just not trying to chase back. He didn't want to know about it. It was anything but a team ethic. I don't know, is he getting criticism for his performances in that department? Like, fair enough if Finn Russell tries a risky pass or a crossfield kick and it doesn't work out. I think you live with that because of his gifts as a player. But the work ethic really was shocking, actually.
It was, and Jonathan Davis highlighted it on BBC, a rugby special over here as well, and it was very graphic. I mean, it was bizarre because it was 7 minutes into the game. If it had been 7 minutes before the end and fatigue had kicked in, then you could maybe understand it if he was just knackered. But it was also where he was going. He was tracking back to the blind side, to the 5-yard line. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And you know, you're absolutely right. With Finn Russell, you're going to get some mistakes at times, and you'd happily accept them for the magic that he can also produce. But we've never ever been able to accuse him of not showing commitment. You know, he's defensively, he never shirks a tackle. He's not a big guy, but he takes a lot of the traffic coming down his channel, and so it was just very, very strange. And you know, there was actually quite a lot of clamour to drop him for the Italy game and maybe bring in Adam Hastings. I'm glad Gregor went with him again, and you got the curate's egg again from out in Rome. There was some brilliant stuff and some magic attack, and you know, he's got every trick in the book, and he's got every kicking game in the book as well. So he's got it all, but he's not put together an 80-minute performance, anything but. He's just, you know, he in a 10-minute period against England, he basically won the game with 2 cross kicks, and they caused the penalty try, and then set up another couple of opportunities. So he's just been in fits and starts. But you know, when you've got a magic, you know, he is world class when he's on his day, but when he's off, he drops down. Now, I think a definition of world class is that your poor performances are still 90% of your good performances, and we've just seen Finn drop quite considerably off that in the last few weeks.
Yeah. Someone like Rory Darge, we mentioned, coming through is a very promising development, and you could almost feel with that kind of attitude, you know, he could be a real totem for Scotland going forward. Generally, what's the production line like? So we're familiar here with how Irish rugby works. Obviously, the school system in Leinster in particular seems to be kind of a freak phenomenon, and then there's a sprinkling of club players, and the various academies of the 4 provinces jump in and take the best, and we go from there. What about Scotland? Because, you know, we see Glasgow and we see Edinburgh. Is the game in rude health, or is there a production line coming? Are there academies in place, or what's the story in Scotland, say, the last guts of the last decade?
So there's quite a few questions there. Let me try and unpick them in the sense that, yes, there are academies. Are they working? No. I really don't think they are. I don't think we have got a production line. The production line, if you can call it that, produces one or two players every so often. And Rory Darge is a great example of that. But it's almost he's a one-off. When there's Ross Thompson, who's been the Glasgow standoff this year, played well. He's been in the Scotland squad, got capped in the autumn. He's a good young player, but there's just not the numbers. And I personally, and it's easy for me to say this, I'm in the cheap seats, I'm not involved in youth development, but I think we need to rip up the whole academy structure and start again, because it's not working. Our under-20s were relegated in the last time that the under-20 World Cup took place before COVID. So we're not even in the top tier under-20s. And Italy beat us again. I mean, absolutely destroyed Scotland last week. We lost to France when they were down to 13 men. And so the under-20s, it's not working. And so I look on in envy with these young players. When the URC takes place during international weekends, and you look at the Leinster and Munster squads, I don't know who they are because they're just young kids. But then you see the highlights, and they're outstanding, and they're ready to go. And we've just not got that. And two professional teams makes it difficult, but we've got your strength. Then the size of your country can then, instead of being a weakness, can be a strength. We should be able to talent ID every single good young player from a young age and stream them in exactly the right way. And I just don't think we are. So I think in answer to your, that lots of questions is, I don't think there's a production line. I don't think our academies work. And I think we need to change something dramatically. We've got schools in Edinburgh. Of course we do. We've got private schools, Merkson Castle, Stuart's Melville. I watched the Under-18 Schools Cup final last week. It was fantastic. Right. They've got a production line. They produce some great players. And there's George Watson's College, there's Dollar, there's Strathallan, lots of great private schools in Scotland that produce great players. But they're just not coming through into the professional game.
Okay. I think actually that your 20s are on a 9-game losing streak actually as well, which is not great.
Could be 10 this weekend as well.
Will be 10. Will be 10. Guaranteed 10. Grand Slam in Dublin. So let's turn our attention a little bit to Ireland. Cian, where were you after Twickenham? In the frustrated corner or the... can we kind of just look at the right side of this corner?
I was definitely glass half full, and I kind of felt like I was in the minority in the kind of the immediate aftermath of it. I suppose why I was is, like, I don't think people really kind of give enough credence to how much of a culture shift there has been within the Ireland squad in terms of the game plan and what's being asked of them. So it went really well towards the end of last year, obviously the England game being a turning point, really good in the summer with a second string squad, and then obviously culminated in the All Blacks win. But it's still very early days, I think, in the development of this game plan and what's being asked for them. And it's not like under Joe Schmidt, and this is something I've spoken to Luke Fitzgerald about, because on the Left Wing podcast, when he would say that it was a myth that Joe Schmidt discouraged people to offload the ball, but it certainly wasn't encouraged to the point that it is now under Andy Farrell and Mike Catt. And I know Leinster have been doing it for the last couple of years, but a lot of the other players, like certainly the Munster players, haven't been playing a style of play like that in Munster for the last year. So that does take time. So I was encouraged by the fact that they stuck to the same game plan, even when it was 15-all in the closing stages. It got nervy, and they did make hard work of it, no doubt about it. Yeah. But some of the offloads that they threw, I didn't necessarily think, and I've heard people who are more qualified in terms of ex-pros saying they were poor decisions, they should have went through the phases more. But if, let's say, I think back to Tyg Byrne offloading to Ian Henderson, or Tyg Furlong offloading to Bundy Aki, if they stick and Ireland score the tries, are we still having the same conversation? Because Tyg Byrne is well capable of drawing that offload. Tyg Furlong's was a little bit more difficult, but how many times have we seen him do it over the last couple of years? So I know what people are saying, a little bit more patience might have broke England sooner, but Ireland are committed to playing this way now going forward. So I think I was certainly crying out for more of an expansive approach, like let players express themselves on the pitch. So if we're going to go down that route, I think we have to allow a little bit of wiggle room, that it's not always going to be perfect. So I was certainly glass half full, and you know what, England played really well and they deserve credit for that, but Ireland were still pretty impressive in the closing stages. And one of the biggest frustrations and concerns I would have said coming out of Paris was the lack of impact off the bench. I think we just didn't see much from the bench at all really in Paris. And you compare that to even guys like Rob Herring has been much maligned over the last couple of years, particularly when you look at what Dan Sheehan and Ronan Keller are doing. But he made a big impact when he came off the bench. So you got the impact that you needed off the bench, and it was enough then to pull clear in the end. So my glass is certainly half full, I think, with Ireland.
Yeah. So Andy, I mean, you can give us the very unbiased, unemotional view. But really, lots of us feel we've gone from playing very efficient and accurate rugby to now being the market leaders in champagne offloading rugby. We're like France meets New Zealand, only better than them both combined.
And it's a very good mate and an usher at my wedding who's probably taking some credit for this, and Mike Catt. So Catt is a great friend, and he's done a great job because your attack, Ireland's attack, is outstanding, better than France. The shape that they produce. And I think on Saturday, I watched that game from Rome, and Ireland were one pass or one offload, like you've just been discussing, or a couple of phases away from absolutely blowing England away. And I found the narrative after that game, especially over here, about England's gutsy defence and what happened up front was remarkable, because they were blown away, and it could have been 40-50 if Ireland had taken their chances. And I do think they should have gone through the phases a couple more times. If you're down to 14 men and you're that close to the line, just the number of phases is eventually the defenders are going to run out of space. So I've been hugely impressed. I just think their shape and attack is unbelievable. And then you've got some of the forwards, Van der Fleer, Caelan Doris, Tadhg Furlong is being ripped apart for his scrummaging. I'm not sure. Listen, I stood next to a million scrums. Was one team absolutely dominant on Saturday? I don't think so. I've spoken to people that know more about front row play than me. And I think the referee, human nature sometimes tries to rebalance what's just happened by sending somebody off in the first minute. So, Ireland don't have a bad scrum. Scotland are not coming over to Dublin on Saturday thinking, Christ, there's a team that just got destroyed by England up front. It'll be a very different scenario. So Ireland are in good shape. I think you're in great shape. I think there's so many good players there that there's a real understanding. Now, you've always had that understanding, even under Joe Schmidt, but it was quite formulaic. And I remember speaking to Driscoll. Brian Driscoll said he loved playing under Joe Schmidt, one of the best coaches he ever worked under, because it was just so organised. And Andy Farrell and Mike Catt and Easterbain, O'Connell, I mean, what a group that is. And it just seems everyone is working very well together, and the players you're getting the best out of your players, which that is what a coaching team should get. Yeah. So if I could just flip back to England for 1 second, Eddie Jones is getting the complete opposite from his playing group at the moment. And I think if I was an England fan 8 years into Eddie Jones's tenure and a year out from a World Cup, and he's still talking about being a work in progress, their attack is a work in progress, I'd be embarrassed about that. So that was my English rant over, but my Irish appreciation, it's up there. I'm very worried about this game on Saturday, because I think Scotland's defence, which has dropped off, as we said, it's going to be tested like it's not been tested so far. And we conceded 6 tries against France and 3 against Italy.
I hadn't realised the Mike Catt link, actually, because I don't know, do you keep in touch much, but certainly around this very week last year, because Ireland played England in the last game, and so 4 rounds in, Mike Catt was coming under massive pressure in the media here, amongst the general public. What are they at? It all looks very blunt. The shape isn't good. We had numerous very shrewd pros coming on this show saying, I actually can't see what they're trying to do. I don't even see what they're working towards. And then, boom, it all seemed to just blossom overnight against England, and the rest is history. So your thoughts on Catt, because certainly the other point that's been made is that Lancaster over the last 2-3 years in Irish rugby has brought the skill set of the bulk supplier to the national team up massively, and that's given the national team a more arsenal to work with. But would be very curious for are you seeing things in the Irish shape that have Mike Catt's fingerprints all over them?
I'm probably seeing more Leinster fingerprints on it than Catty. Of course, Mike has done that, but when you can see the way that Leinster played with Johnny Sexton for all his years, and the wraparound and the runners off that, and playing out the back, that's been Leinster's key for years, and they've done it so effectively. And you'd be stupid as a coaching group not to harness that, to bring that into play when you've got so many Leinster backs in that Irish backline. So, Catty he's a great man. He's a great rugby thinker. He always was when I played with him down at Bath. I love playing with him because we would talk about the game, but not in the detail or the depth that some people talked about. We played what was in front of us, and I think that to me is within that structure. He's given Ireland the freedom to play what's in front. And when you've got players as experienced as Johnny Sexton and then Henshaw and Ake and Ringrose and any number of your back three, they're just playing. They're doing set-up plays that have got options. And depending what happens with the defence in front of them, they're choosing the right option. Now that's good coaching and it's good players. And when you've got that together, you're getting the results that you're getting.
Cian, I haven't really talked to you across the last 4 rounds. Overview on Ireland. I mean, most things are in very good working order. There's a slight issue over strength and depth here and there, and if we could wrap Johnny Sexton in wool and Tadhg Furlong as well until the World Cup, we would do it. But like in the main, no team has everything in perfect shape. I mean, this is kind of as positive as we've been about Irish rugby in years, back to 2018 really, isn't it?
There is. I would slightly disagree that there's a slight issue with depth. I think there's a couple of big issues with depth. I think particularly a prop. I think Ireland are potentially sleepwalking into a disaster at the World Cup, and I know that sounds strong, but I just think when you
said and Tighthead.
I think so, yeah, because like if you take Tadhg Furlong out of that team, I think that the drop off is significant to who's below them, and that sounds obvious because he's the leading world tighthead, but I thought it was like concerning last week, not just about how the scrum went wrong, because I was writing about this in the build-up that like when you take Andrew Porter out of that team, like he's another ball player, and Andy was touching there and what Mike Catt has brought, but for me it's been the shape of Ireland's attack in that 1-3-2-2 system. That pot of 3, like Andrew Porter is so important in that pot of 3 with Caelan Doris because you have several options off it. Cian Healy just doesn't give you that anymore. Now, Cian Healy, I wouldn't have had any issues going into the game or concerns over the scrum. As it turned out, it was a disaster, but we know like there was extenuating circumstances around that. But Cian Healy is going to be 2 years older by the time we get to the World Cup. I think that is a concern. I don't think Dave Kilcoyne, who is underneath, plays the same way that Andrew Porter plays in terms of being that ball player. So I just think if one of those props gets injured, like we've seen now, and without Ronan Keller, I think there is a big drop off. I think there's a concern in the second row. James Ryan is obviously going through a really difficult time, and hopefully he gets back, but all in his own good time, obviously. But I think Ireland are a little bit light there in the second row too. So my overview is that, it's going really well, but if we're talking bigger picture, I think there are a couple of things that Andy Farrell will be concerned about, and I think that's why the summer tour to New Zealand is going to be absolutely crucial to strengthen the depth in obviously the toughest place that you can go, because there are a couple of holes I think on the depth chart appearing, but overall I think I've been really impressed. I think they made hard work of it against, it's been funny, the last 2 games they played against 13 men for most of the game against Italy, and they played against 14 men against England.
What, by the way, is Andy Farrell meant to do about the lack of depth at prop?
This is it. If Andy Farrell was in this room, I think he would go, well, who do you want me to pick?
What's he meant to do?
I don't know, clone Tadhg Furlong or clone Tadhg Porter.
And these are the very, I'm sure if we listen to radio in various other countries, they'd be getting into these in-depth depth charts, and it's important to have these conversations, but there's a degree whereby, I don't know, Andy, you can give us your verdict. I'm sure there is a massive drop off in our 2 starting props to the other 2. There probably is a point with every single team in World Rugby, if you take away their 2 or 3 best players, if you're unlucky enough to lose them to injury or they disappear, the team's not going to be as good. I don't know if there's been a squad in World Rugby history where you could take away the 2 or 3 best, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's a luxury that very few coaches have. And Gregor Townsend actually had it to an extent in the first game against England, that Scotland went with Sutherland, Turner and Fagerson up in the front row, and then were able to bring on Keble and McInally and WP Nell, and there's not much of a drop off. They're all good players, and Scotland for years have always struggled with depth. We've over the years been able to put out a good 15, maybe sometimes a good 20, very rarely a proper 23, with then players really pushing those 23 from behind. And so to be able for Gregor to then, and Gregor then changed the front row, starting front rows the other way around for the Wales game, because of what he saw was the Scotland's better scrummages were going to come off the bench against England to take on Marler, but they were going to start against Wales, where Wyn Jones was playing, because Wales were stronger on their starting bench rather than their bench. So when your coach has got that ability to change, and you've got that quality to come on, that's a luxury. But when you're talking about world-class players, which Tadhg Furlong undoubtedly is, and Porter looks like he's on that same direction of travel. Of course, when you lose them, there's going to be a drop off, and just like as good when you take off Doris and you bring on Conan. I mean, that's like for like. That's a luxury for Andy Farrell. But it doesn't always happen like that. New Zealand have been blessed for years, haven't they? With, you could name a third 15 in New Zealand that would beat probably most teams' first 15. You could. There's just so many players. That causes a few issues in selection as well. But it's strength and depth through a tournament, through a World Cup, with the rugby and the way it is at the moment is huge. And that's why the bigger countries with the bigger squads, and then bring it down into club level, the bigger clubs with the bigger squads, that's why they do so well, because they can cope with a few injuries. We've had a few injuries since that luxury of the props, and we're not scraping the bucket, but there's a big drop off in quality from where we were. So it's in a physical sport, you need a strength and depth, because no team will go through any campaign using just your starting 15.
I think that's spot on, and that's probably the point I'm trying to make, is that you think back to Paris, both Andrew Porter and Tadhg Furlong played 73 minutes.
When the clock hits 60, 66, 67, 68, you do start wincing a bit.
Absolutely, and you look at like how well the French front row were playing, and they all came off after 50 minutes because like that's the quality that they can roll off the bench. South Africa do the same, obviously, with their bomb squad. And I just think if you're going to, and I know we have a tendency, unfortunately, to look at everything through the prism of a World Cup, but when the games are condensed and you come to like playing Scotland, South Africa, and it probably Tonga, which will be a big game at the World Cup in terms of the physical battle, it's unrealistic to expect your two props to play that long every game, and that would be my concern of the bigger picture.
It's totally valid. It's just no one has an easy solution, unless, like, I don't know, there's some world class Irish qualified props drinking an Andy Friend's son's bar that we can bring over pretty quickly again. I don't know. It is an issue, and then the Sexton issue is, he underlined the gap again this championship, didn't he? So that's where we are. So final thoughts, Andy, because I know you have to go at the weekend. Scotland, one win in 23 years in Dublin.
Yeah, I was there in Croke Park, wasn't it? It was the last game in Croke Park. Dan Parks with that conversion from the left touchline.
Deny Ireland a triple crown, actually, as well.
No, sorry about that. You've rammed it off us since, so you've certainly got your own back. Listen, this is going to be a tough game for Scotland. There's no doubt. I guess Scotland could be dangerous opponents because there's nothing to lose. Nobody's giving us a prayer to go over to Ireland and win. I worry. There was some really good attack last week against Italy, but it was against Italy, whose defence was not there. And then the defence to concede 3 tries, and that's in the back of, as mentioned twice already, 6 tries against France at Murrayfield. So you do not want to be going to Dublin with a defence, with question marks over your defence and the structure, and just understanding the system. Why is the system breaking down rather than individual tackles when you're coming up against probably the best organised and attack in the Six Nations, way better than France. France, attack in a different way than Ireland. Ireland have got the best attack, and that worries me. So you've got, obviously, you need to win the game to have any chance of winning the championship, and I cannot see France losing, I'll be honest. So I don't think you will, but you've got to throw everything at it. So that makes it. I'm a bit worried about the 80 minutes of the Viva on Saturday, I'm afraid. Okay.
Well, listen, it's fantastic to have you on. Andy Nicol, thanks so much for the time. Very much appreciated.
Very welcome.
Cheers. Andy Nicol there with us, former Scottish international. What is the word before we say goodbye on James Ryan?
There is no word really. He's gone back to Leinster. They're going to assess him there, and judging by their past history, you think back to how they've treated Johnny Sexton and more recently Caelan Doris. It's probably the best place for him to be because Caelan Doris went to see neurologist, I think it was, which is such a scary word when you hear about it, and it's so topical at the moment with high tackles and stuff. But when you hear the word neurologist, and I remember thinking back to like Caelan Doris was probably he is in his early 20s, and it's such a scary thought. So don't know what Ryan's process will be. I presume they're going to probably keep it under wraps for now, but yeah, like it's just terrible really. You see Charlie Ewels gets a 3-game ban today, and the likelihood is that James Ryan will probably be out of the game a lot longer than that. You'd hope not, but given his history, he probably doesn't need to rush this back whatsoever. Yeah,
I was trying to make sense of the Charlie Ewels thing, who, by the way, I don't think was intentionally trying to hurt anyone. None of us are saying that, but it was certainly careless in the extreme. So law number 9.13, which says you must not tackle late, early or dangerously. Now, he was certainly late and it was certainly dangerous. So the medium entry point there for a tackle like that is 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then rugby has all sorts of mitigation, including like remorse, contrition.
Bring the nice biscuits to the hearing, which is more difficult now when it's virtual.
His conduct at the hearing is part of, so I don't know, do you walk in and sit in a chair backwards and put your cap on backwards and say, what do you all guys want to talk about?
Most people do get that, to be fair, don't they? You'd want to be a real badass not to get it.
It'd be an odd choice to not behave well at the hearing. And to be fair, a relatively unblemished disciplinary record. So entry point 6 weeks, reduced to 3 weeks. So how many Six Nations? Well, one Six Nations game. And then I don't know, I guess club games beyond that. But 3 weeks versus, James Ryan, a massive setback. And the question mark has been raised over the past number of days, without talking about Ewell specifically, but do we need to start handing out month and 2 month bans for head hits of any kind? And I suspect that's a topic we'll come back to. It's hard to argue against longer bans for hits to the head, isn't it?
Yeah, and like even Ewells, I think, can get another week shaved off that if he does some sort of training course that you can do, because this is what rugby has introduced lately now as well. So it's so conflicting, isn't it? Like, I mean, a professional rugby player in his, like, Charlie Ewells is really experienced, being asked to undertake, a course on how to tackle. Like, that's sort of bread and butter stuff that you teach under 8s. Yeah. So yeah, like, there's no doubt like that rugby is in a very difficult place, and I wouldn't personally be against handing out longer bans because I just don't see what the deterrent is. Otherwise, okay, 3 weeks, fair enough, he'll get it down to 2, but of course he's going to think twice about his body height when he's going into a tackle again. But if he had the full 6 week ban, I'm sure it would be in his head a lot more. So one for the powers that be, but I certainly wouldn't be against for longer bans, depending on the incident. Like, I mean, I don't know if you saw Bismarck du Plessis' sumo tackle on Alex Kendellen in the Munster game last weekend, but like, my God, like, that was on the opposite end of the scale. Essentially, like, dropped him from a height like on his neck. It'd be very interesting to see what the ban out of that is going to be. So very different to Charlie Ewells' incident, but incredibly dangerous. Like, Alex Kendellen, like, really young Munster, exciting Munster number 8, was lucky he didn't break his neck. So that is one that needs a long ban, and if you're going to make an example of something, it would have to be something like that. So it'd be really interesting to see how hard they come down on him. Okay.
There was just a tweet in wondering, are there any hot prospect props coming through a la Sheehan and Kelleher?
Well, actually, right now, Jack Boyle I know you've been covering obviously a lot of the under 20 Six Nations, has been really, really good. And to be fair to the person who contacted, Andrew Porter is probably the last one to come through. And when he was coming through with the under 20 Six Nations, you just knew that this guy was exceptional. So strong. Like, just so good. So, like, Ireland have had good under 20 teams over the last couple of years, but there's been no kind of props that you'd hang your hat on and say this guy is really coming through. To be fair, there's a couple at Leinster. Thomas Clarkson is a tight head and Michael Milne is a loose head, who are both really highly rated but have had injury problems, so probably and to be fair, it does take props a little longer to develop. I think we're seeing that in Munster as well with someone like Keenan Knox, who's Irish qualified now as well, hasn't probably played as much as he would have liked because it just takes him that bit longer. I think those guys are all like 22, 23, but you think back to even Tyg Furlong's emergence, like Andrew Porter was a bit of a freak, so it does take a little bit longer. But it goes back to my original point. If Andy Farrell was sitting here, he would say, well, who do you want me to pick? And it is an issue. It is an issue. There's no doubt about it, but there's no easy fix.
Yeah, there's a degree of head to the World Cup, cross our fingers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like, I mean, like I said, everyone's going to be a year and a half, we're 18 months out from the World Cup. So when someone like Ian Healy's already at the end of his career now, and I know he's recently signed a 2-year Leinster contract, but it's a lot of mileage on the clock.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, we'll enjoy the weekend for the time being. Our rugby coverage on Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish Rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent. Thanks a million, Cian.
Cheers, Joe.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish Rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.